I want to pivot to the Hall of Fame because there were zero inductees in this year's class of finalists, and the name that everyone's talking about is Curt Schilling. He narrowly missed out on that 75% threshold needed to be inducted in the Hall of Fame. The three-time World Series winner has requested to stop the count and be removed from next year's ballot, which the Baseball Writers Association has urged the Hall not to do. I just am curious what this says about the politics of the Hall of Fame, and do you think that Schilling ultimately deserves to be in?
Well, listen, sports and politics are intertwined at this point. It's unavoidable. I mean, just the cultural blending that we've seen over sports, politics, entertainment, it's just unavoidable at this point. And I think it's a good thing to some extent. You know, players should speak out. Players are more than what's the push now? They're more than just athletes. I mean, I'm a student athlete, and I would say that I have opinions on more than just sports, and I think that's true for any professional athlete, whether they be retired or still in the game. Now, that being said, there's a difference when your political opinion is, I wouldn't even say political. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but when you're coming out and you're making comments that are not even subtle, but blatantly racist and blatantly controversial, it gets a little challenging because when you look at the rules provided to the Baseball Writers Association when voting on players for the Hall of Fame, it says, quote, voting shall be based upon the player's record, playing ability, integrity, sportsmanship, character, and contributions to the teams on which the players played. And so that morality cause is something that's kept players like Pete Rose out of the hall. Even other players on this ballot, Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds, for using PEDs. So people look at things beyond just baseball stats, and whether or not has Schilling done enough to keep him out of the Hall of Fame based on just comments, that I think is up for debate. But I don't think you can just look at a player's body of work just based on stats. I think we're beyond that at this point.
I'm a little conflicted over this. I think, I don't think that it's controversial to say that the on-the-field product of Curt Schilling is Hall of Fame worthy. I think we may agree on that. Based on his longevity, World Series win, never got a Cy Young, but obviously more than 200 wins on the mound and a legend. So on-the-field product, Hall of Fame worthy. This character clause, the morality clause, I have been a longtime supporter of using it against PED users. I think that the Hall of Fame becomes tarnished, and I feel like I'm in a baseball minority on that point. But I've felt that way strongly. So in that sense, I appreciate the clause. Like you were getting at, Kelly. Nobody should be punished for their politics. I mean, I like nobody should be punished for who they went out and voted for. That's different from the case here with Curt Schilling, which has been, some serious, let's call them violations of character. It's not about politics, it's not about who he supports politically. It's about what he has said. And the most recent example on January 6th, when there was a terrorist attack in the nation's capital. This was somebody who expressed sympathy for those who attacked and overran the Capitol. That's a if we're going to ever invoke the character clause, that the track record that he has built up without apology would probably warrant it. But here's the thing: the system is broken. It should not be the decision of the baseball writers to weigh the character. First of all, it is a hard decision. It's objectively subjective, right? There is no way to measure it out. And I don't know how you do. I think Buster Olney has a good suggestion. He says, leave the character clause to the Hall of Fame itself. The committee should decide on that. Don't let the baseball writers decide. There's an argument that I've been behind for a long time, which is that the Baseball Writers of America shouldn't even be voting to put people in the Hall of Fame to begin with. There's a good chance that Curt Schilling failed to get 75% of the vote on his baseball record, and not even because of the character. We don't even necessarily know that. But the baseball writers are notoriously bad at their job of selecting who should go into the Hall of Fame. So it's very possible that he just missed it because they took stock of his product, of his body of work, and said he doesn't deserve to be a Hall of Famer. So I don't even know if you can attribute this to the character thing. If you can, that becomes very controversial, and I don't think it should be up to the writers to make that decision.
You guys both mentioned PEDs, and I want to touch that, but before I do, we've seen like the writers even request to change their ballots after they already mailed it in. I'm just curious, do you think that this whole situation sets a bad precedent for someone beyond Curt Schilling in the future? Like, is this a move that permanently changes the politics of the Hall of Fame?
It's an interesting question, and I think it kind of goes back to the point that Chris was getting at there, and how you don't even know the reasons behind their decision not to put him in the Hall of Fame. And you look, he missed it by 5%. There was still a significant chunk of those voters who supported him being in the Hall of Fame. And if you look at his stats, 216 wins, 3.46 career ERA, 6-time All-Star. He never finished first in a Cy Young voting, but did finish second 3 times and 3 World Series rings. Now you look at the other pitchers who have been elected to be a part of the Hall of Fame. There's plenty with fewer wins or a higher ERA, but there's also plenty who have lower ERAs and more wins. So, it goes back and forth. Is this just a baseball thing? Is this more than that? And again, like Chris mentioned, yeah, I think there's such a fine line between deciding someone's political view isn't acceptable and deciding someone's actions are immoral. And, that we're in a part of our country right now. And I think, again, this goes way beyond sports, where there's a fine line at this point on both sides of the spectrum, and we are a country that preaches being able to have free speech and freedom of opinion. And as maybe controversial as one side may be compared to another, people are entitled to their opinions, and to punish them for having those opinions, is that unfair? And is that something, like Chris mentioned, that should be taken out altogether in consideration for the Hall of Fame? Should it purely be their baseball performance, their baseball stats? And I don't think it should be, because I think athletes should transcend more than just numbers. And I think you look at a game, and a game is about more than just the final score. A lot more happens in a game than just the runs that the batters that touch home plate. So I think you do have to look at the bigger picture. However, I think in order for someone to be disqualified based on their character and integrity and sportsmanship and all that, I think it's a lot less controversial when it's something that's more tangible, like taking some PED supplements, or with Pete Rose, admitting to, throwing games and that kind of thing, versus maybe just saying something on Twitter or saying something in an interview. So again, it's a very tricky situation, but I think in this situation, it might need to be it definitely something you need to look at as how legit and how substantial are his offenses. Do they deserve him not making the Hall of Fame?
Well, the rule as it's written, I don't think it has been incorrectly applied. I mean, if there's a character clause, and there's obviously a famous gold standard to get into Cooperstown, you've seen it harshly applied against Pete Rose. You talk to any baseball fan, they believe Pete Rose is a Hall of Famer for what he's done on the field. It's been unfairly, not that it's been unfairly used, but it's just unfairly written. It probably shouldn't be there. I'll say this. I think that it doesn't hurt anybody to put Curt Schilling in the Hall of Fame. I condemn this man. I think he's, a jerk, and I think a lot worse of him than that, but nothing that I could say on the radio. But I am bothered by the victim narrative, and that Curt Schilling is a persecuted person. Definitely bothers me, but there are a lot of people who feel that he's persecuted for his views, and I don't think anybody should be persecuted for their views. I think even if they're hateful, they are protected under, certainly under our country's constitution. Now, baseball could make an exception to that and say, well, we're going to have our own standards here, and they have for a long time. So based on the standards that they've established, I don't think it's incorrectly applied at all. And again, it's an if that's how the baseball writers made their decision about Curt Schilling. And again, we don't know. But it's certainly come to a point of controversy where it's worth rethinking the entire system. Like I said, baseball writers probably shouldn't even be involved to begin with, but taking away this subjective lever from them and saying, let Pete Rose in. He did not commit an on the field crime. And the same goes for Curt Schilling. And so based on that, put them in the Hall of Fame. It doesn't on its face hurt anybody.